So, Jim, I received a letter from a client the other day, and they said they'd recently inherited £115,000. And the
Yep.
question was, is the Fife rental property still worth it?
Oh, that's the magic question. So tell me more about this letter then. What does it all say? Because this is it.
Okay.
You've inherited what, 115,000 invest.
115.
And the key here is the Fife rental property market still worth it and worth the risk? So what does it say then, Richard, in detail? And we'll go through this.
Right, okay. So the letter itself, we've recently inherited 115,000. We have contemplated purchasing a Fife buy-to-let property to support their early retirement. They've taken into consideration of considering the Skipton Building Society offers 4.25% return on their 18-month bond. And in their words,
so basically what we're saying is there's a savings bond, an 18-month bond with the Skipton Building Society right now giving you a 4.25% return. You have £1,000 personal savings allowance on interest. So you could earn up to £1,000 and you don't pay tax on any interest up to £1,000 worth. And so go on. This is just to give some background to everybody about where. And
then, in their words, with the stagnant Fife property market, they're uncertain about whether investing in a rental property is worth the trouble.
Okay, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
How would I respond to that? Well, dear Mr. and Mrs. A from Fife, I would say, realistically, if your primary objective is to generate income and reduce your workload, buying a buy-to-let property is likely not the favourable option unless you leverage the purchase. So what I mean by that, well, buy-to-let is not for the faint-hearted. I'll tell you that straight away. It is definitely not for the faint-hearted. This is a medium to long-term strategy.
Yeah.
But in response to this question, let me explain this. So the Skipton Building Society is a 4.25% bond, which would provide an annual income of £5,175. Now, on the face of it, that sounds very attractive for 115,000 investment, because you've still got your 115,000 when you think about it. But remember, inflation's eroding this round about, I think it's 8.7 just now. We'll just say 10 to make it easy. So inflation's eroding. So basically, you're only getting half of what you could get on, in terms of inflation. So you're only your money is still eroding every year it passes. If it's 8.5 or whatever it is, inflation, it's still eroding by 50% of what the erosion was going to be in the first place. So hopefully everybody understands that. Now, excluding the initial setup costs of solicitors, I think land and buildings transaction tax.
You have that.
For £115,000, you can buy a 2-bedroom terraced house in Kirkcaldy. And what would that rent for, Richard? A 2-bedroom terraced house in Kirkcaldy?
I mean, you're talking £700.
Okay.
Maybe slightly more, but 700 is a fair
if
price.
I take 8400 and 8400 and divide it by 115, you're talking about a 7.3% return. Gross return, remember.
No, I was just going to say, that's a gross return, not net return.
So this is a gross return. And why do I say gross return? Because this is assuming you bought it for cash.
Yeah.
So 7.3% gross return, this is what it is. Net return is a different story. That's when you introduce leverage in your position. So, when you rent a property, you need to allow for management fees, the other things you've got to take into account, and the maintenance. So the return would actually reduce when you actually took that into account to round about £5,880 per annum, or a yield equivalent to 5.1%. We're almost getting to the 4.25, aren't we?
Yeah.
And you kind of think it hardly seems worth the hassle for an extra £82.75 a month with a buy-to-let property compared to that bond.
Yeah.
So let's look at this a bit further. If you use a 75% interest-only mortgage on a 2-year fixed-rate deal, you're actually getting 3.94 just now with the mortgage works. Okay?
Yeah.
On the same Fife home. So leveraging, even at today's higher interest rates, that's what you're doing. The return on the 25% cash invested, so this is what's invested, because it's not the 115 and you're investing, is £28,750 that you're investing in. That's what you've got left in it. That increases your return from the 5.1 to 8.6%. Now that's your net return. So you've grown from a gross return of 7.3 to a net return of 8.6. However, this is when it gets interesting. I'm looking forward to this bit.
Yeah.
Stay with me, folks. And if you're not staying with me, ask me what it means or whatever I'm talking about. Because it comes right off the top of my head quite easily. But for most people, it's like, I have not a clue what you've just said to me. So if that's just one property for 28,750, how many more can you buy for 115,000? So if you bought three, if you bought three, you're probably you probably got the same number as me in the mind, Richard.
Yeah.
About three, you would use 3/4 of your inheritance of the 115,000 to buy 3 properties with 75% mortgages. The monetary return after the mortgage payments would be 7,445 per annum, leaving you 28,750 to more than cover the land and buildings transaction tax and legal costs.
Yeah, legal within your 6%, yeah.
So let me think about this again. If you had cash to cover the land building transaction tax and legal costs, your return would rise to 9,927 annually if you bought 4 homes, because you could buy 4 now because you've now covered the costs. There's another story here. If you bought them in conjunction with another 2 properties, you'd obliterate ADS, which is additional dwelling supplement, which would actually exonerate you from that as well. So you wouldn't have that cost either. But that's another story. So is the return sufficiently higher than 4.25% threshold to make it worthwhile? That's what you've got to ask yourself.
Yeah, and that's the big question. Is it really worthwhile and doing all this? And obviously that's what we're discussing at the moment to see whether it actually is. It will be the question everybody asks. And do you know, when they've got money and you've got a pot of money, whether it is inheritance or you've got savings and you think, right, let's invest this, let's set ourselves up for retirement or whatever. There's an element of risk always, but I think there's ways and means of doing things and speaking to the right people so that you're doing that correctly and feel confident in whoever's helping you do that, or even within yourself if you're knowledgeable enough to do it. And really the question is to make sure it's worthwhile.
Most landlords are actually primarily motivated by the potential for long-term capital growth rather than the actual rental income, though, because they realise now. I mean, most actually realise now there's not that return, the higher return anymore that you can get. In other words, to create an income straight away for yourself. So what you need to do is actually then look at the long-term capital. Did you realise in Australia that most landlords actually buy without the income at all, and they actually end up sometimes making a loss, which in my mind isn't worthwhile.
We spoke about this the other day, Jim. I didn't know this.
Because they think the value of the property will go up. Now, I'll be honest with you, I knew people that actually did that in a strategy before the credit crunch. Then the credit crunch came along and wiped them out completely because they had nothing else to keep them going because they had no income coming in. And they still had to service the debt at that high value, and their property was in negative equity, and most of them never returned, are no longer here. So it's primarily motivated by the growth rather than the rental income. And you mentioned the current Fife market is stagnant.
Well, that was what they mentioned. That's, as I say, that was their words. The Fife property market being so stagnant, they were uncertain about whether to invest in a rental property.
So what's your opinion on the market then?
I mean, we've stated several times in the blogs and things that Fife have upturned recently, and rents have risen. Obviously, rents have risen dramatically and rocketed over the last couple of years, and we've got to a point where they have risen right across the whole of Fife. So to say the property market stagnant for me is, I think, right.
Let's cover that then. Let's cover that thing that you said there right now about Fife house prices have upturned recently, and that's fine. And rents have risen like a rocket in the last couple of years. Now, why have rents risen? Why put my teeth back in? Why have rents risen like a rocket in the last couple of years? And it's primarily to do with the fact that
they've not risen for such a long time.
Yeah, since the early 2000s, rents have actually been quite stable and all the time, and they've actually been historically low in comparison to the value of the property.
Yeah.
Now that the value of the property have actually gone up, therefore rents is having to go up in order to provide the proper return on investment. So it's not the fact that, I mean, it's just like anything. Inflation's gone up. House prices have gone up in the last couple of years. So why wouldn't rents go up as well to do that? Because people want a fair return on capital. And that's only right, that you should get a fair return on capital. Or what's the point of being a landlord? There's no point to it then. You may as well just take your money and go and do something else completely different, like invest in the 18-month bond and give you 4.25 hassle-free. No tenant, nobody to worry about, no repairs to do, no call-outs to do. It's just your money sits in the bank and makes 4.25 every year for the 18 months. Well, for the 1.5 years. So that's where we are right now and there. And of course, there's a risk to Fife house prices declining significantly since interest rates are rising. And we have world events that could change things. However, historically, though, Fife property prices have generally outpaced inflation at an average by 2.4% per annum since 1975, something that savings bond can never do. I looked at the statistics for house prices in general in the UK. And this was the reason behind this was because I was wanting to point out to people how house prices have actually outperformed inflation, no bother. So what can I say to that? Since I was born in 1966, so 56, 57 years coming up for, house prices, to the average house price in 1966 compared to the average house price today in the UK has gone up by 8,004%. I'll say that again, 8,004%. Inflation in the same period of time, according to the Bank of England's calculator, has gone up by 1,333%. House prices have outperformed inflation by 6,671% more than inflation.
Now that's a big difference.
Boom. That's blown your mind, because it blows my mind.
And but then people, people might have the question, Jim. People might have the question then when you're saying that, is that same trend going to continue? I mean, is that not just a snapshot of that? Yeah.
All right. Now, since that last 20-year period, since the year 2000, salaries have doubled. The average salary has actually doubled since the year 2000. Okay? And what will systematically happen over the next years, next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? Salaries will continue to increase. And they will continue to go up anyway, regardless, because everything else goes up as well. Therefore, everybody has to be paid more as a result of that. Therefore, the whole level goes up. As things become more efficient and more money is saved in these cost efficiencies, there'll be more profits for business, potentially. Therefore, more money will be available to award, to people with investment in funds. That money will then go back into the system again, which will rise prices again. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the way the capitalistic system works is the fact that economics is about supply and demand. And because of that, it continues to go up inflation every single year. This is why the main driver behind this, in order to keep prices level and leveled off, is to actually, for the government to actually have this target of 2% every single year. They don't want any more than 2%, because that keeps everything stable, and it keeps prices stable, and it keeps the demand for wages and salaries stable as well, because everybody's standard of living has grown to that capacity. Now, somebody actually said to me the other day, what was it they said? They said something along the lines that, it's all right, I've not got a start. it's no problem with the video. I'm just trying to think how to word this properly. Will the fact that prices continue to go up affect the money in your pocket? For example, base rates. So base rates are going up right now. But what everybody fails to realise, that when everybody took out a mortgage in 2015 and onwards, everybody was, even though the mortgage rate was maybe a fixed rate of 5 years for example, for 2%, even though it was 2% or something ludicrous, or even 10 years at 3%, and people have still got that deal. If it's coming out right now, what everybody failed to realise, that everybody was stress tested at mortgage rates of between 6 and 8%.
Yeah.
So the people that are getting squeezed right now, that are their mortgages, which is 1.3 million people throughout Britain at this point in time, they're going to be ending the fixed rate mortgages this year, will actually have been stress tested at between 6 and 8% originally. So while they think they can't afford their new mortgage, they can under the stress testing rules, because the stress testing rules assume that you don't need to go out every single night to lunch or dine. You don't need to have takeouts all the time. You don't need to go on luxury holidays every single time. That's all classed as luxury living to the stress test system. So when you bring it right back down to the bare necessities of what you need to live, which is food, light, heat and water, and a roof over your head, the reality is it all comes back to that premise that there is money there for people to afford that. Therefore, we're historically going to still be in that position where prices will still continue to rise, because that disposable income is actually, it could be easily be allocated somewhere else. Now, people are taking out mortgage rates right now as well. Mortgages right now are stress tested at between 8 and 11%. So this is why. So what I'm saying overall is this will continue to rise because the affordability is always still there. Even banks are becoming more creative by saying, I tell you what, it's no creative really. It's instead of 25 years for your mortgage, we'll give you 35.
We'll do 35,
yeah, because it decreases the monthly payment every single month. It allows people to then have money to go and have disposable income to do other things. And things like rising costs of utilities. Well, they're actually going to be dropping from July. And then, food price inflation to take into account that. So they'll not be squeezed that much in real terms. Now, there will be people out there which will be really struggling at this point in time. And that's not okay. But that's the government that needs to sort that out. We can't do anything about that at all. But we can just see the overall situation and how the economy works and extrapolate that and see how it applies to the buy-to-let system, the property investment system, and also the housing market for sales. Yeah. This is why I think property prices will still go up, because the cost of everybody's salaries will continue to go up as well. And because the banks are becoming more creative, making it easier for everybody to afford every single month, lower monthly payments by extending the mortgage term, it allows people to buy property at a higher price. Therefore, simple supply and demand suggests that there'll be more people still chasing one individual property, therefore pushing the price up even more over the medium to long term.
Yeah.
So your long answer that I did there now to your short question about will this continue to happen is absolutely. Yeah, because I'll bet you're bottom your dollar. I bet you're bottom dollar, because back in the 1966 and back in the 1970s and I remember the 1980s when we had a mortgage. Yeah. Our mortgage more or less was about 45 to 50% of our income. Today, the average mortgage is about 36% or maybe 30%, 30 to 36% of the average income. Yeah, so there's a huge margin to go, but it's because everybody's got into this standard of living where it's like, I've got to have 2 cars and I've got to have a purchase. Nobody ever had 2 cars before in a hire purchase. So that if you get rid of 1 car, you've immediately brought yourself back another £300 a month in your hand by getting rid of 1 car. Oh, but I need another car. Well, there's public transport, and there's also walking to your work or cycling. Or sharing with someone else. What? Share with someone else? I hear you say. And I can't do that. It's like, really? But people, we are like that as a nation and as a culture. We've got so embedded into this, this psyche of we have to have everything now and an instant
the expectation that these things are needed.
Instant microwave society. Ping! I want it now. Ping! I want it now. Ping! I want it now. That's all people do. I deserve it. Everybody on the telly tells me to deserve it. Kim Kardashian told me to deserve it, so I deserve it. That's what people say to themselves when they come on and an influencer. That's why they're called influencers, for that reason. When an influencer comes on social media and goes, yeah, come on, you deserve it. You worked hard for it. And it's like, yeah, I do deserve it. And it's like, no, you don't. You've got to earn it. You've got to earn it. That's when you deserve it. You've got to earn it. You've got to work for it. It takes blood, sweat, and tears to earn something. And then you'll know what it's really worth. Because when you've earned it, you'll never spend it on rubbish.
Yeah.
You'll never spend it on luxury items because you know the amount of effort you've had to put in to get that money.
Yeah. I think it's a good point, and we covered it before as well, and people are aware if their current mortgage rate and things is coming to an end and they're going to have to change and it's going to go up and their mortgage payments are going to be higher. And some people will have the attitude that, God, how could they expect me to pay that? It's jumped up so much. But people don't understand that has been stress tested and you can afford it. And you just need to do without some of these things. And we've done it with my own situation. And the last time we sat down, Jim, midweek, and looked at how, like, my mortgage and payments and things. And of course I can, if they were to change it. Luckily enough, I fixed mine for a longer period of time. And that's only because I made that decision. Not that I knew and I had a crystal ball, but just the way it was. So I think it's important that people appreciate that. But just to come back, so what we're talking about, obviously, Fife house prices generally outpacing inflation, and they do that on average. You said about 2.4% per annum since like 1975. Yep. So then that would mean that 2.4% needs to be added in to your expected yield for your rent to give you that return on your rental investment. Then
absolutely. Yeah. However, remember the 2.4% every single annum house prices have actually outperformed inflation since 1975 is actually something a savings bond will never ever do. Plus the fact, here's the more exciting thing, is you're actually earning income at the same time from the rent.
Yes,
that's not factored into here. When you think about the logic of it, because we're talking about house price inflation now.
Yeah.
So we're talking about house prices, not income. So there's two revenue streams out of this. There's one eventually when you sell the asset, which is a capital gain.
Appreciation.
Yeah. And then there's also the other one, which is the income that you get every single month as a result of actually holding the property and actually renting it to someone else. Now, incidentally, that someone else doesn't have the commitment of having a mortgage. So literally we've taken the place of the bank, but they've got the beauty and the luxury that they don't need to pay for any repairs or improvements in the property, and they can walk away anytime they want with a 28 days notice. Easily.
28 days notice, and you've got a lot less expensive entrance and exit costs as well.
Entry and exit costs are comparatively low in comparison. It's literally just a month's rent up front and a deposit as well. Yeah. That's literally the entry cost to actually go in, and then exit cost is the same. So when you compare it against the entry cost to buying a house, you've got solicitors' fees, you've got I'm supposed to be an estate agent. I'm arguing against buying and renting. No, buy a house.
But we spoke of before.
Sell a house.
Renting and buying are both good options depending on the individual and their circumstances.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's what it is. It's mobility of labour is the most important point, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's get back to this. And you said yourself, this means that 2.4% needs to be added to the yield to give the rent and true the return. That's absolutely right. Therefore, with an asset that retains its value in real terms, because we've just proved that 8,004% versus 1,333 in inflation over the same period of time, in my book, is really outperformed. Incidentally, I mean that's quite interesting. Let me just check something there, just out of my curiosity, because it's now piqued my interest. In a manner, okay, right, okay. It's a lot bigger return over the number of years that I've been in since 1966, since the 2.4. But then that's taking into account inflation as well, so that's a different story. Okay, so let's get back to this and talk about that. The asset remains its value in real terms, the rental income stream that does the same, and the depreciating debt. Remember the debt reduction strategy, because what you've borrowed from the bank at £70,000 erodes as well with inflation. Bet you nobody knew that, eh? You don't really think about that, do you?
What you own as inflation goes up, what you own the bank will reduce at that rate as well.
The bank is taking the hit for the inflation as well, because every single year it goes by, if inflation's high, the bank's taking an erosion in their cost. So they're actually giving they're maybe, for example, lending the money to me at 4.25%, but they're actually their money is eroding by 10%, or 8.7, which is the inflation rate now. That's what you don't realise. So there's another income stream here, and it's called the depreciating debt. So not only have you got the capital appreciation over a medium to long term, the income it comes in, you've also got the depreciating debt that comes with it. The long-term potential of Fife buy-to-let properties, and any property in the UK, if the numbers work, we talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
It appears more enticing straight away. However, though, it's essential to know that property values can experience sudden and significant short-term declines. It's no surprise that Halifax was on this morning, saying it. Oh, property prices have actually dropped for the first time in 11 years. 1%.
Yeah, overnight. But then if you're not selling, then
1% in the last 12 months. And you had to laugh. And you're actually saying, it's like, see the headline, first time in 11 years, according to them. They scare people. But the reality is it's only dropped 1%.
Yeah.
1% of the average property price in Fife, for example, is literally 178,000 times 0.01% is 1,780 quid. Wow, that's going to cost me more to move.
Yeah, it would.
But the reality is, when you're buying the next property, your property is dropped by 1% as well that you're buying. So it's like for like. I always say property is all about owning and living in a property is all about securing your place on the property ladder and making sure you're not open to the swings in property appreciation and property depreciation. It keeps you stable on that ladder. So you're not going up or down, you're staying stable. When you want to go up, you get a hand up and it's called a mortgage from a bank, which actually allows you to buy a bigger property. And the bank will discuss with you how much it's going to cost to get that mortgage. Likewise, if you want to rent a property, then the landlord will discuss with you how much it costs to rent that property, which is the mortgage, effectively. Yeah.
I mean, you talk about these short-term declines, and obviously, like you say, the Halifax, the 1% in the last 11 years. But if you're an investor and you've got a portfolio or a landlord with several properties, and then these things really matter to you because you're not going to sell it. If you're in for the long term and you've got them in place to provide you with that cash flow income to support you through retirement or for setting up for your kids or whatever, then these declines for the short term won't have an effect on you at all.
Yeah. I'm just looking up the number of private landlords in Scotland, because I need to explain this to people as well.
Yeah.
Freedom of Information Act. I'm sure somebody actually did a Freedom of Information. Freedom of Information. Talk amongst yourself. Freedom of Information number. Okay, here we go. So there was a publication done, Freedom of Information Request in 2020. Okay, and the person asked how many registered landlords are in Scotland, how many properties do they have each, and the Scottish Government came back and said, and this is gospel. The Scottish Government came back and said that 228,212 registered landlords are registered with them. That's the law. They have to be. So we're assuming that every single landlord in Scotland's registered because they have to be by law. Now, 228,212 registered landlords. they only have one property. That's 94% of all registrations. The next they said is, how many have two properties? Well, 12,317 have two properties. That's 5% of the population, the landlord population in Scotland. And then they asked, well, so what does that leave then? It leaves 1%. So what does the 1% have? And they said 1% of landlords in Scotland, which is 1,757 landlords, have 3 or more properties. So why am I saying this? And why am I telling people this? Well, the reality is, most landlords only have one property. And the reality is as well, is they don't make a huge amount of money out of it. And it's used as an additional supplement, possibly to their income or their retirement for later on.
Top them up or help their retirement, yeah.
And then you come back to saying, where does the impression come from? And I'll get a wee bit off the beaten track, that all the landlords are running about in Ferraris and Lamborghinis if they've only got one property. If I've just said to you, you're only earning about £8,000 out of property, how on earth can you afford to buy a Lamborghini?
No.
Where does that come from?
No, but and I think
that's 99% of the landlord population have only one or two properties. One mostly, 94% of them do. So how can they afford things like that? Because it comes out of their own income. Do you know the only person that runs about in a Lamborghini is the property trainers, the people that want to sell you courses? Because they want to attract you to say to you, if you do and invest in property, you're going to be able to do what I'm doing. But they don't realise that what they're doing is actually just selling courses to them, and that provides for their lifestyle, which is the Lamborghinis and Ferraris and their big houses. But most landlords don't have that. And every single landlord doesn't have that. It's the property trainers that have got it. Mm-hmm. That's not an argument to go into property training, by the way.
No, it's not. And I think, but that's interesting figures, because a lot of people do think, oh, landlords, and there's lots of landlords out there and they've got big portfolios and things. And that just shows you the very, very small amount that have the bigger portfolios.
You get the story. My landlord turned up in a Lamborghini to collect her rent. It's like, well, it's no 99% of the landlords in Scotland anyway. And the Lamborghini probably wasn't bought by the rental. It was probably bought by their income because they're working as a professional, maybe they're a professional accountancy, maybe they run their own business outside of this, or maybe they do something else which is completely different to this, which earns them an absolute fortune. And this is only just a supplement to invest their money in, to give them an extra additional support when they retire later on. As a strategy. You know me, I've got a small pension, but my pension was originally property.
Yeah.
And that's what most people do. Anyway, let's get back to statistics and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So, property can go up, experience sudden and short-term declines, sudden increases, short-term declines. But if you're not selling, it really bears no relation on it at all.
No.
So it bears no relation on it at all. Okay. So if your aim is to contribute to early retirement, like I spoke about, you will need to invest your 115,000 in. That's what we're saying to them. Cash is suitable as a short-term option. This is the key here. But it won't preserve your purchasing power as time passes. As I've just explained, the banks are not going to give you more than what inflation is, and not more than what they're borrowing money from savers. Because let's be honest, the banks are borrowing money from the people that put their money in the bank. So they're taking your return at 4.25 and they're lending it to people like me at maybe 7%. And they're making the difference. But they're not lending it just to me with your money. They do what's called fractional lending. So they're lending your money out 10 times over.
Yeah.
So it's called fractional lending.
I know that. I didn't know it was called fractional lending.
And it's on the principle that the likelihood of 10 people not paying at the same time means that you'll still be able to pay out your 115 if somebody says, I need to take it back out the bank.
Yeah.
But this is where the problem happens when everybody does a run on the bank. The bank's got no money to pay because they've lent your block of money out 10 times to different people. So this is what they do, because the odds of everybody running on the bank at the same time or tooling them out at the same time is very, very slim. And that's how they gear themselves. So that's another thing. So if you're short-term, as cash is a short-term option, definitely. It won't preserve your purchasing power, though. To generate a real return, you must invest that cash, whether in property. And a carefully selected portfolio of maybe stocks. I wouldn't endorse crypto, but people would go,
don't say crypto.
Well, you can see now it's in the news that Coinbase is actually getting sued by the American government. Gold, that's another one that hedges. Gold's not traceable, by the way. And another investment or another investment avenue. Maybe
there is other investment avenues, but we talk about properties because it's what we do. And well, I mean, it is. I mean, we've said it a lot of times.
There's another investment avenue, and it is called training and education.
Yes,
because I spent a lot of money on training and education, but that's a great investment because it allows me to understand what I need to do next in order to build wealth bigger. Because I'm learning from people far more successful than me, so I pick my training options carefully over time, and then invest the right amount of money into that because I think it's a good value and good return for my investments. So it's an investment in me. But ultimately, the best investment aligns with your comfort level. That's really what it comes down to. And it's seeking advice would be the definitive answer to this.
The right people, the right people,
you need to seek advice. If you've got 150,000 to invest, this is just my opinion. And my opinion probably doesn't account for anything. You don't need to listen to me. But the reality is, I am not a financial advisor. This is just what I would do. So this is what I would do, how I would do it. I would end up, well, it's what I've done, isn't it? It's just exactly what I did. I bought, instead of buying one property and having all my eggs in one basket, I leveraged my position. I used the bank's money. I got a cheaper rate, then I would get a return. So I'd get a higher return. I'd make the difference on the differential between. I was borrowing at the bank at 4%. I was making 15%. Therefore, I was making 11% on every pound of the bank's money. Yeah, that's how it works. So I'm leveraging my position. So the bank leverages its position on the saver, then I've leveraged my position on the bank. And then subsequently, that's how money's made. And that works in every single society. That is called the capitalistic system. That's the system we operate right now. We don't have any choice in that. It makes no difference. So the simple fact is, the country is not building enough homes, okay, for people who live here. And the people who are living longer and the 600,000 plus net immigration, sorry, not migration's going out. Net immigration we're experiencing. Well, if you're playing the long game with great advice from an agent and do your homework, this could be what you need to invest in.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing there. Property investment. Because of the situation we're in, we're not building enough homes. We've got all this. We've got a lot of obviously immigration, and a lot of what we've covered today, property investment. And the question is it still worth the risk for a Fife rental property or any rental property? We keep referring Fife, but that's where we are. Any rental property in the country, then the answer is yes, as long as you're careful about how you do it, you've got your numbers right, and you've got the right people alongside you, helping you and advising you to do that.
Yeah. Now, I'm prepared to ask questions, answer questions with the rest of it. I will come to TikTok because I noticed there's a lot of remarks, but it's nothing to do with this. It's just a general remarks on that. So we'll come to TikTok later on. It's no relevant for here. So remember, there's a proviso, an undernote score here. With all investments, all income will attract taxation. And it would be best to chat with an accountant about that because your position will be completely different depending on how you structure your buy-to-let investments, whether it's a limited company or whether it's in your own name, or whether it's in a limited liability partnership or a joint venture with someone. It's entirely, that's why you need to speak to an accountant about it and get the best advice. What's your final thoughts on this, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, just to reiterate that I think from what we've obviously put out today, it's clear that it is still worthwhile. It needs to be done correctly. You need to know what you're doing or have the people who know what they're doing helping you along the way. And whether that's financial advisors, accountants, or an agent that knows what they're talking about and knows the market and knows how to set you up with a good buy-to-let portfolio. If you're doing property investment, then yes.
Good stuff. Okay, thanks very much, Richard, for your time. And until next time, guys, bye-bye for now.
Yeah, bye.